I need to tell you about the day my brother stole a watch and accidentally unlocked a life I never knew existed. My name is Margaret. I was 41 years old when I discovered that everything I believed about my father was a carefully constructed lie. And I was 42 when I learned that some secrets are so big. And I was 42 big. And I was 42 when I was 42 when I learned that some secrets are so big. They reshape not just your past, but who you thought you were. This is not a story about theft. This is a story about identity, about the masks we wear, and about what happens when someone tears them off without warning. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see your own family. It was November 2006, the kind of November in Michigan where the cold seeps into your bones and stays there, where the sky is perpetually gray and the trees stand like skeletons against the horizon. My father had been dead for 6 weeks. Heart failure. He was 73. He died in his sleep, peacefully, the way everyone hopes to go. We buried him on a Tuesday. Rain poured down so hard during the service that I couldn't tell if I was crying or if it was just water running down my face. My brother Danny was 39 then. Always the restless one. Always the one who couldn't hold a job, couldn't hold a relationship, couldn't hold anything that required commitment or responsibility. He'd been living in our father's house since the funeral, supposedly sorting through things, deciding what to keep and what to donate. But I knew Danny. He was looking for anything valuable he could sell. I didn't find out he'd taken the watch until he showed up at my house 3 days after Thanksgiving. I was in the kitchen making soup chicken noodle, the kind our mother used to make before she died when I was 17. Danny came in through the back door without knocking, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Maggie, we need to talk." I turned off the stove. Something in his voice made my stomach clench. "What did you do?" He pulled out a chair and sat down hard, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on my kitchen table. A watch, not just any watch. Our father's watch, the one he wore every single day of his life. The one he never ever took off, not even to shower. The one that was supposed to be buried with him. "Danny, you took Dad's watch from his grave?" No, Maggie, listen." "I took it before the funeral." I know that makes me awful, but I thought maybe it was worth something, you know? I know that makes me was worth something, you know? But I thought maybe it was worth something, you know? Something to help me get back on my feet. I stared at him, at the watch, at the desperation in his eyes. "So you tried to sell it?" "I took it to a jeweler. Old guy downtown." He looked at it, turned it over, and his whole face changed. He asked me where I got it. I told him it was our father's, and Maggie, he said something strange. He said, "Your father must have been a very important man." Then he opened the back. Danny reached across the table and picked up the watch. His fingers were still trembling. He turned it over and showed me. The back opened like a locket. Inside, where you'd expect to see the watch mechanism, there was something else. A tiny compartment, and in that compartment, a key. Not a regular key. Something small and silver and intricately designed with numbers engraved on it. 4-7-2-9-8-3. "There's more," Danny whispered. "Engraved inside the cover, look." I leaned closer. In script so small I could barely read it, it said, "Helsinki Station, Box 17. Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath you? That moment when reality tilts and nothing makes sense anymore?" I sat down slowly. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." "But Maggie," I looked it up. "Helsinki, that's in Finland. I know where Helsinki is." "Dad never went to Finland, did he?" I thought back. Our father, Robert Sullivan, high school math teacher. Quiet man, predictable. He taught calculus and trigonometry at Jefferson High School for 38 years. He wore the same brown cardigan every fall. He drank his coffee black. He read the newspaper at exactly 6:30 every morning. He never traveled. Never talked about foreign countries. Never even had a passport that I knew of. "No," I said quietly. He never went to Finland, but that was only the beginning. Before I tell you why that moment changed everything, let me take you back. Let me take you to the house where I grew up. A small 2-story on Elm Street with white aluminum siding and blue shutters. A maple tree in the front yard that turned brilliant red every October. A driveway where oil stains marked the same spot for decades because Dad parked in exactly the same place every single day. My father was a man of routine. I remember that about him more than anything else. He woke at 5:45 every morning, showered, dressed, made coffee, read the paper, left for school at 7:15, came home at 4:30, dinner at 6, television until 9, bed at 9:30. Every day, every single day. My mother used to joke that you could set your watch by him, and we did. We all did. When Dad's car pulled into the driveway, it was 4:30. When we heard his footsteps on the stairs, it was 9:30. His life was a metronome, steady and unchanging. But now, sitting in my kitchen, staring at that watch and that key, I realized something. A man who lives like that, a man whose entire existence is built on routine and predictability. That's not natural. That's discipline. That's control. That's someone making absolutely sure nothing ever slips. We have to find out what's in that box, Danny said. Danny, we can't just fly to Finland. Why not? Because it's insane, because Dad was a math teacher. Because this doesn't make any sense. Exactly. Which is why we have to go. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him he was being ridiculous, that there was probably some simple explanation, that we should just leave it alone. But I couldn't, because something in me, something I'd buried for 41 years, was waking up. I'd spent my entire childhood feeling like there was something just out of reach. Some truth my father carried but never shared. I remember watching him sometimes, sitting in his chair by the window, staring out at nothing, his face so distant it was like he was somewhere else entirely. I remember asking him once what he was thinking about. He looked at me and smiled. Just remembering, sweet pea. Just remembering. Remembering what? Nothing important, but his eyes told a different story. 2 weeks later, Danny and I were on a plane to Helsinki. I told my husband Richard the first was going to a nursing conference. He didn't question it. We'd been married for 19 years, and somewhere along the way, we'd stopped asking each other questions that mattered. I worked as a surgical nurse at Mercy Hospital. Long shifts, exhausting work. I came home tired, he came home tired, and we existed next to each other rather than with each other. The flight was 9 hours. I didn't sleep. I just kept turning that key over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it, wondering what door it would open. Helsinki was cold. Colder than Michigan. The kind of cold that cuts through your coat and settles in your chest. We took a taxi from the airport to the address Danny had found online, a private storage facility near the Central Railway Station. Old building, stone walls, heavy wooden doors. The woman at the desk was in her 60s, silver-haired, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through us. Danny showed her the key. Box 17, he said. She looked at the key for a long moment, then she looked at us. Your names? Sullivan, I said. Margaret and Daniel Sullivan. We're here for our father's box, Robert Sullivan. Her expression didn't change. She typed something into her computer, waited, then nodded slowly. The box has been here for 34 years. Your father set up very specific instructions. The box can only be accessed by his children, and only after his death. I will need to see death certificate and identification. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the documents. We'd brought everything: death certificate, birth certificates, passports. She examined each one carefully. Then she stood. Follow me. We walked down a corridor lined with safety deposit boxes. Our footsteps echoed. The air smelled like old paper and metal. She stopped at box 17. It was larger than I expected. She inserted a master key, then gestured to Danny. Your key, please, he inserted it. Both keys turned. The box opened. Inside was a metal case, about the size of a briefcase. The woman lifted it out and placed it on a table in a small private room. Then she left us alone. Danny and I stood there staring at it. Neither of us moved. Finally, I reached out and opened the latch. Inside, there were files, documents, photographs, and a letter addressed to my children. I picked up the letter. The handwriting was my father's, careful, precise, the way he wrote everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Danny came and stood next to me, and together we read. My dear Margaret and Daniel, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and somehow you have found what I hoped would stay buried. I don't know if what I am about to tell you will help you understand me better or make you hate me. Maybe both. But you deserve the truth. My real name is not Robert Sullivan, it is Mikhail Sokolov. I was born in Leningrad in 1933. I was recruited by Soviet intelligence when I was 22. I was trained. I was sent to America. I was given a new identity. I was told to build a life, a normal life, and wait for orders. Those orders never came. Instead, the years passed. I met your mother. I fell in love. I had you. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being Mikhail Sokolov. I became Robert Sullivan. I became your father. I never passed information. I never betrayed anyone. I simply lived. But I kept this box because I needed someone to know. I needed you to know. I was not the man you thought I was. But I was also not the man they wanted me to be. I was something in between. I was your father. And I loved you. Always, Dad. The room tilted. I sat down hard. Danny just stood there, reading and rereading the letter like if he stared at it long enough, the words would change. He was a spy, Danny whispered. Our father was a Russian spy. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, holding that letter, feeling my entire life reorganize itself in my mind. Every memory, every moment. Every time I thought I knew who he was. The man who taught me to ride a bike. Russian spy. The man who helped me with my algebra homework. Russian spy. The man who walked me down the aisle at my wedding. Russian spy. And that was the moment I stopped being who they thought I was. Because the people in my town, my coworkers, my friends, even my husband, they all thought I was just Maggie Sullivan. Nurse, wife, daughter of a math teacher. Ordinary, uncomplicated. But I wasn't. I was the daughter of a man who lived two lives. And in discovering his secret, I discovered mine. We went through the rest of the box. There were photographs of him as a young man in Russia. Documents with names and dates, instructions, training materials, and one more thing. A thick envelope with my mother's name on it. Inside, there was another letter. This one was different, softer, more personal. My dearest Helen, you asked me once why I never told you about my childhood. Why I never took you to meet my family. Why I had no photographs, no stories, no past. I told you it was painful, that I'd lost everyone, that I wanted to start fresh. You believed me because you loved me. And I loved you enough to lie. But I also loved you enough to write this down. To leave it somewhere you could find it if you needed to. You deserve to know that every moment with you was real. Every kiss, every laugh, every quiet morning. That was not Mikhail Sokolov. That was Robert Sullivan, the man you created. The man you loved into existence. Thank you for saving me. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Forever yours, Robert. My mother died of cancer when I was 17. She fought it for 2 years. I remember sitting by her hospital bed, holding her hand, watching her fade. My father never left her side. He slept in a chair next to her bed every single night. He read to her. He sang to her. When she died, he didn't cry at the funeral. But later, at home, I found him in the garage, sitting on the floor, clutching her wedding ring, sobbing so hard I thought he'd break. That was real. That grief was real. Whatever else he was, that love was real. Share this with someone who would understand, because this is the part that changed everything. Danny and I spent 3 days in Helsinki going through everything in that box. We learned that our father had been one of dozens of sleeper agents placed in America during the Cold War. Most had been activated, arrested, or sent back. But he'd been forgotten. Or maybe ignored. He'd fallen through the cracks. And in those cracks, he'd built a life. We found letters he'd written but never sent. Letters to his mother in Russia. Letters to the handler who'd disappeared. Letters to himself. In one he wrote, "I am no longer the man I was supposed to be." I do not know if that makes me a traitor or deserter or simply a father. I hope it makes me human. When we returned to Michigan, I didn't tell anyone. Not Richard, not my children, not my closest friends. Danny wanted to go public, to tell the story, to sell it to a journalist. But I couldn't, because what would that do? It would turn my father into a headline, a cautionary tale, a spy story. And he was so much more than that. Instead, I did something else. I started asking questions, not about him. About me. About who I'd become in the shadow of a man who'd spent his whole life pretending. I realized I'd been doing the same thing. Pretending to be happy in a marriage that had gone cold. Pretending to love a job that exhausted me. Pretending to be satisfied with a life that felt like it was happening to someone else. My father had been given a role to play, and he'd played it until it became real. I'd been doing the same thing. Playing the role of the good wife, the good mother, the good nurse. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten who I was underneath all that. I didn't know it yet, but the world was about to change. 6 months after we returned from Helsinki, I made a decision. I asked Richard for a separation. He was shocked. He asked me why. I told him the truth. Because I don't know who I am anymore, and I need to find out. I moved into a small apartment downtown. I took a part-time position at the hospital. I started painting something I'd loved as a teenager, but had given up because it wasn't practical. I reconnected with old friends. I traveled. I breathed. And slowly I started to understand something. My father's secret hadn't destroyed my life. It had given me permission to stop pretending. 1 year after I found that watch, I was sitting in a coffee shop when a woman approached me. She was in her 70s, elegant, with an accent I recognized immediately as Russian. "You are Margaret Sullivan, yes?" she said softly. I nodded, suddenly afraid. She sat down across from me. "My name is Irina. I knew your father, many years ago. Before he became Robert Sullivan." My heart stopped. "How did you find me? I have been looking." "Not to hurt, to thank. Your father saved my life once. In Leningrad. Before he was sent away. I never forgot. When I heard he had died, I wanted to meet his daughter. To tell her that he was a good man. Even then, even when he was Mikhail, we talked for 2 hours. She told me stories about him as a young man, idealistic, conflicted, afraid. She told me he hadn't wanted to be a spy, that he'd been coerced, that he'd spent years trying to escape, and when he finally did, it was by becoming someone else entirely. When she left, she pressed something into my hand. A photograph. My father as a young man standing next to a beautiful young woman. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "Mikhail and Irina, Leningrad, 1955. I keep that photograph in my wallet. Next to one of him holding me when I was 3 days old, because he was both men. And both men were my father. I'm 59 now. Danny and I don't talk about the box very often. He remarried, settled down, found a kind of peace. I'm still in my apartment, still painting. Still learning who I am. Richard and I are divorced, but we're kind to each other. My children know part of the story. Not all of it. Maybe someday. The watch is in a safe deposit box in Michigan. I visit it sometimes. Hold it. Turn it over. Remember the day it unlocked a life I never knew existed. And I realize now that secrets aren't always meant to hurt us. Sometimes they're meant to protect us until we're strong enough to carry them. My father kept his secret because he was afraid of losing us, afraid of destroying the life he built, afraid of being seen as the enemy. But in the end, his secret didn't make him less. It made him more complicated, more human, more real. I teach now, part-time at a community college. I teach art to adults who've always wanted to paint but never had the time. I tell them what I learned from my father's watch. That it's never too late to discover who you really are. That the life you thought you were supposed to live isn't the only one available to you. That sometimes the biggest secret is the one you keep from yourself. Truth does not shout. It simply waits to be heard. And when you're finally ready to listen, it changes everything. If stories like this remind you what dignity feels like, subscribe. You belong here. And don't miss the next story. It is something truly unforgettable.